I'll have to say I'm the finance geek. So I don't have pretty travel pictures, and I love them, thank you. I do scuba dive and paddleboard and do all the things, and I'm very passionate about the environment. And there was a point in my life when I actually left finance because I wanted to be a hippie, and then somehow got sucked back in with carbon markets. And what I really realised at the time, trying to prove that Al Gore was a fraud, which he's not, by the way, he's really cool, and I am still an ambassador for his climate reality project, that money is the oxygen that funds all of the good and all of the bad. And it's okay to be a finance geek, because for us to actually fulfil the Sustainable Development Goals, we all have our strengths and we all need to work together. So please try and stay awake. There's a little bit of finance geek in this. And I've been very passionate about the Sustainable Development Goals, and my ex-colleague Kath Leong is in the stage here, and she will know that, when we met, I worked at National Australia Bank, and, you've got every statistic flying around, but we were the Sustainable Development Goal geeks, and, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, prime number, love that, 169 different frameworks, and 232 measurable elements to the Sustainable Development Goals. Call them what you want. That's almost mission impossible, right? But one of the things in trying to get projects up and running, and, over the years we've launched funds, we've invested in clean tech, we've done all of the things, I started to realise that unless you can measure, you can't do anything about the goals, because money is the oxygen. We just heard the stats from Andrea at Deloitte that we need, 5 times more investment, or 500 times. We once did a video in 2011 where the number is $100 trillion that we need to finance the transition to a low carbon economy, which includes the Sustainable Development Goals between then and 2050. And that number is enormous. So in terms of how I ended up on this stage, aside from the fact that Samantha is my best friend, in my career I've taken on a journey of being very passionate about blockchain, because I believe that is the actual game changer for how to measure and then how to transact finance and fund the Sustainable Development Goals. And I have to watch myself to not get too geeky, and I promise you I'll try and stay in check. We've always had the mantra, which I really relate to you, Manisha, of don't solve one problem whilst creating another. And from my point of view, that comes down to measurability. And somehow through my luck, I've ended up at a company called DigitalX, and we're a listed Australian company. And all of the beautiful people that I work with, we're a tiny micro cap. When I started at the company, we went on a mission to recreate the company didn't have a purpose. And all of the people I worked with came up with the purpose statement. I swear to God I didn't influence, of finance for impact. And I'm not here to sell DigitalX tonight. What I'm here to do is to explain how I passionately believe that blockchain and tokenisation, and you can say all of the statistics about Bitcoin, I've got a trump card for all of that. The technology and the rails that we can build, and the new financial rails that we can build with blockchain, for me is the game changer to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I've been on that mission. It's taken me on some weird and wonderful twists. And because Kath Leong has come all the way here, I'm using a housing example tonight, which is just one of the many things we can do with real-world asset tokenisation that can actually create the measurability that can then fund the impact. So if I try and break it down really simply, and Andrea, maybe I need you up here, because simplification is a massive skill, right? So the way I look at it is, when we create these new financial rails and when we tokenise real-world asset tokens, I'm going to have a crack at this, you create this thing called radical fungibility. Now, radical fungibility means that everything becomes money. And when everything becomes money, everything can become transactional, which means everything can be investable, which means if you take it all the way back to my 262 points of the Sustainable Development Goals, I can measure them all, I can tokenise them all, I can transact, therefore I can fund, and then we just need to build it. So in order to do that, we've been working on some projects. I don't need to tell you who DigitalX is. So we have created a product which is called a Digital Asset Reference Token Fund, or DART. And what that is designed to do, we called it DART because I love the acronym ART. And an asset reference token is any real-world asset. You take the data points from them, you tokenize them. They become like a Bitcoin, which means they can be transacted. And then you can create any type of fungibility, which means those tokens can become money, which means they can transact, that I can transact in any form. Now, you might think that's really weird and really complicated, but when you start thinking about it, it's really simple, right? Money is a false human construct created by two people agreeing to exchange a value. And if you can agree that value, that's all that money is. You know, governments and countries and banks in particular have put money into a realm of finance, and they've changed the nature of money by wrapping the finance around it. But money is money, and it is what you and I decide we agree to transact. And when you break it down right into those fundamental points, that for me is a game changer for the Sustainable Development Goals and the investment that we need to make it happen. So inside of the Asset Reference Token Fund, which is super geeky. It's very hard to explain simply, but what I will say is we create what we call smart contracts, and those smart contracts program the functionality of a financial transaction, and we embed that into the financing using the data from the asset, and that allows us to create digital representation of that asset and then embed those financial returns into those assets that can then be transacted. And the first project that we're working on is a housing asset reference token. It's not actually our first, but because Kathy's here. And what we do is we're solving the housing affordability problem for Australians. Now, you might think, how is that aligned to a sustainable development goal? Well, let me tell you, I've been told many times that lots of the sustainable development goals are not investable. I passionately believe they all are. And by the way, SDG number 16, peace and institutions. Oh my God, how is that not investable? Sport, everybody. The Women's World Cup is on right now. And I could geek on like that about, thank you, about every single sustainable development goal. And this is like how we make them all investable. So I do believe if I press play. Right, now that's not a product plug, by the way, because it's a wholesale fund. However, on the back of that, we're running a 1,000 Faces campaign to find the first 1,000 Australians that we can help into the property ladder. And why is this important? So what's important is that we've taken the co-ownership deed of a house and I've turned that into something that a bank will recognise and allow as collateral. What that means is you don't need a deposit to be able to buy a house now, because we can give you the deposit, we can collateralise the equity stake in your house, and therefore you can get the mortgage without having the money, and that is a game changer. Now, in terms of the product that we're working with a company called Bricklet, and they charge a rent on that portion of the house, and that makes it financially viable for an investor. So I can be in my mainstream finance and stand up on this stage anywhere with any super fund in the world. What's that got to do with the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, there's this super geeky thing inside of that, which is called the capital stack. So the capital stack of the overall investment of the house, which represents 100% of the house, right now is financially viable because we charge the 6% rent. My friend Kath here, who works for the Victorian government in housing affordability, there are many, many, many people who can't pay that 6%. So if I walk into a room with investors, they're going to kick me out of the room because they're not going to make a financial return. And what did I say? Money is the oxygen that funds the good and the bad. People will not do anything unless they're going to make money in investments. And I'm sorry for that. We'll talk about, philanthropy in a second. But But so many of those examples that you used of, great innovations that have been funded, they've been funded out of philanthropy. And that's great, except where does that get us if we can't fund all of the really great innovations that need the funding? We need to be able to find a way to do what we call a blended capital stack in impact finance, which means we can take the philanthropy, we can blend that into the capital stack of the bigger deal and make sure that the opportunities that weren't previously fundable become fundable. Now, how do we do that, and how do we create that with asset tokenisation? Well, if you can tokenize it, then you can measure it and you can create a value. Now, who here, and we wanted some interaction, so this gives me a break from lecturing people, who here has heard of carbon credits? Everybody, thank you. Yes, what a shit show of them. Oh, no, we won't go there. What a great invention by humans, false human construct, that I will pay you whatever amount of money for a ton of theoretical carbon that gets removed from the atmosphere or whatever the type of credit is. However, if you think about the underlying structure of that, and I can take the same principles as a carbon credit, I tokenize those principles, then I apply them to impact, and then I can tokenize that impact. I can say, if I've got two comparisons of my house that's got a 6% rent, and then I've got Kath's house where we can get the funding with no rent, the bank won't lend them the money, but the bank will lend me the money if I'm white collar and I can pay the 6%. So how do we get that to work with tokenizing with the impact? If we can tokenize the value of the impact of putting in the philanthropy to that house, I can measure it against the 6% in comparison, I can put a value onto it, and then the philanthropist can receive a financial return because I can tokenize that impact. Now, that might sound like a really awkward example, but when you start to measure impact, there isn't an example of a sustainable development goal of all those 262 measurements that I can't actually tokenize, and therefore I can create value. Because guess what? There's a whole lot of people in the world that are pretty much greenwashing. And in carbon markets, we create those carbon markets because they fund the projects. To fund the projects, you receive credits, and those credits allow you to create economics out of those projects. And we have projects that wouldn't ordinarily get done. So has someone got a hand up? Oh.
Are you effectively talking about resale securitization?
Well, I have built models that I call instant securitization. So in this particular example, creating the mortgage in the token and all of that could be a securitization, yes. But really what we're doing is just funding that deposit for the people. And then the theory of change is then we can create an overall fund with the housing with the 6% yield. And then the houses that don't have the 6% yield, I can bring in the philanthropy, create the impact token, blend the capital stack and make the whole fund investable. Yesterday, I could only fund the house that yields the 6%. Tomorrow, if I tokenize the impact, I can also give money to the house with a no return because I can blend that inside of the fund and create a value out of the tokens that create that impact because I can transact on the outside with an impact investor who will place value on those just like you would with carbon. Does that make sense? See, geek, yeah. How many minutes? 4 minutes left. Oh, my God. Okay. So I'll go a little bit more into the example, just because this is not a product plug, as I said, but really this is just to what we've really come to understand, or I have the hard way, is that everybody in Australia understands home loans. And if I talk about this with an instant securitization or carbon, people sort of shut down. But if you can actually explain it in a way that every Australian understands, which people in Australia are obsessed with owning homes, then it actually becomes tangible. That I take the 20% of the house. Yesterday, that ownership of that house could not be fractionalised. All you could do is pay a mortgage down, the bank would lend you the money. Today, I can take the 20%, I can take that house and I can cut it into two chunks. 80% the bank writes the mortgage over, 20% we co-own, so it's a co-ownership deed with the mortgagee, and then we tokenise that co-ownership deed, place a value on it, we receive interest, and we receive a capital gain for the 20% ownership of that house. That gives a value to an investor, which means we can get people to invest in the 20% of the houses. Therefore, you can have a house without a deposit. And then tomorrow we'll be able to do it with people who don't even have the ability to pay the rent on the house. So I'm just about at the end. And what I really wanted to land the plane on is that this is just one example. And if you look, I've given the geeky breakdown of the Sustainable Development Goals. This technology, the background and the backbone of Bitcoin is all about community. All of the code that everybody uses, so much of it is open sourced. This technology can be accessible to everybody because of the volatility in the markets and the way that some of the crypto crazies carry on. The whole community does get a bad rap, but there are so many people doing good with this technology that it really is for each and every person here who wants to have a project to be able to look into the technology and use it to facilitate and get faster funding for your project, because we can build investment pools out of any type of investment opportunity. We can standardise them, we can measure them, and we can create different kinds of money out of each different type of project. And as I said, we can have radical fungibility, which means we can transact that impact just like we transact carbon, just like we transact money, and everything takes on a new value, which actually will allow us to unlock capital into the Sustainable Development Goals, which is really important. I love green hydrogen. I love the big end of town. At NAB we did all of the renewable energy projects you can ever think of. But actually what we need to do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals is each and every person needs to be investing at that grassroots level, because the change comes from all of us, each and every one of us, and we have to do that from the inside out, and that means every project has to be valued. And from my point of view, blockchain technology and using it for good and for impact is the pathway towards that. So thank you, everybody.